My house was burned to ashes by an HOA leader who thought she had destroyed me, until she discovered the quiet homeowner she challenged was the judge waiting in the courtroom. Welcome back, everyone. Before today's story begins, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story is released. Your support means more than you know. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel grow and allows us to keep sharing incredible stories with viewers around the world. And before we begin, tell me this: where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Now, grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's dive into today's unforgettable story. The night my house disappeared behind flames, I noticed something far more disturbing than the fire itself. The person watching it burn looked completely calm. I still remember the sharp smell of smoke filling the freezing air, the orange glow reflecting across the street, and the sound of sirens cutting through the silence of my neighborhood. My name is Nathaniel Brooks, and before that night, I thought I understood how far someone could go to protect their own power. I was wrong. I arrived just as firefighters were battling the flames that had already consumed most of my home. Water sprayed across the walls, pieces of burning wood collapsed into the yard, and neighbors stood behind the safety barriers whispering about what had happened. But I was not listening to the rumors. I was watching, because something felt wrong. My house was gone, but the reaction around me told a different story. People looked shocked. They looked confused. They looked heartbroken. Except Cassandra Whitmore. The HOA president stood near the sidewalk, dressed perfectly despite the chaos around her. Her expression was controlled, almost rehearsed. She looked at the fire, then at me, as if she was observing a problem instead of witnessing someone lose everything. "Nathaniel, this is unfortunate," she said quietly. "Hopefully this will remind everyone why following community standards matters." Those words stayed with me, not because they were cruel, because they revealed how she saw the situation. To Cassandra, this was not about a destroyed home. It was about control. For months before the fire, Cassandra had made it clear that she believed the HOA had authority over every decision in the neighborhood. She questioned my property improvements, challenged my choices, and repeatedly reminded me that the community had expectations. I never fought with her publicly. I never gave her the argument she wanted. I simply asked questions and followed the law. Apparently, that was enough to make me a problem. After the firefighters left and the street became quiet again, I returned to the temporary apartment where I would stay while trying to rebuild my life. I placed the few items I had saved on the table and began reviewing every interaction I had with the HOA. The letters, the notices, the emails, the conversations where Cassandra spoke as if disagreement itself was disrespect. At first, each piece looked insignificant, but together, they created a pattern. This was not a sudden conflict. It was a story that had been building for a long time. I started documenting everything carefully. I created folders, organized dates, and recorded every detail connected to the events before the fire. I knew anger would not help me. Accusations would not help me. Only facts would. Cassandra believed she had removed my ability to fight back when my house became ashes. She believed I was just another homeowner who would eventually accept defeat. She did not understand who she had challenged. She did not know that patience was not weakness. She did not know that I had spent years studying the law, understanding how evidence worked, and learning that the truth always has a way of surviving. That night, standing among the remains of my home, I made a decision. I would not chase revenge. I would not become like the person who caused this pain. I would find the truth. And when the truth finally reached the courtroom, Cassandra Whitmore would discover that the quiet homeowner she underestimated was the one person she could never control. The hardest part after losing my home was not the damage left behind. It was watching someone who believed she had won continue living as if nothing had happened. Cassandra Whitmore returned to her role as HOA president almost immediately. She attended meetings, answered questions from residents, and carried herself with the same confidence she had before the fire. To anyone watching from the outside, she appeared calm and organized. But I noticed something different. She was not acting like someone who had witnessed a tragedy. She was acting like someone trying to protect a story. I spent the following weeks examining everything connected to my conflict with the HOA. I reviewed every letter, every notice, and every conversation that had taken place before my house burned. At first, I thought I was looking for one piece of evidence, one message, one mistake. But what I found was something much larger. A pattern. Cassandra had spent years creating an environment where questioning her decisions felt almost impossible. She used HOA rules as a shield, making every disagreement appear like a homeowner's failure to cooperate. The problem was not the rules themselves. The problem was how she used them. I discovered complaints from other residents that had been ignored. I found records showing repeated disagreements between Cassandra and homeowners who refused to simply accept her decisions. Different people, different situations, the same outcome. People who challenged her authority eventually became problems she wanted removed. One afternoon, I met with a neighbor named Robert Hayes. He had lived in the community for over a decade, and when we sat down to talk, I could tell he was uncomfortable. I always thought someone would eventually speak up, he said. Robert explained that he had seen Cassandra pressure residents before. He remembered meetings where people stopped asking questions because they knew their opinions would be dismissed. That conversation confirmed what I had already started to suspect. My situation was not an isolated conflict. It was part of something bigger. I thanked Robert and continued collecting information. I did not want rumors. I did not want assumptions. I wanted facts that could withstand scrutiny. Every document had to be verified. Every statement had to be connected. Every detail had to tell the same story. While I worked quietly, Cassandra continued presenting herself as the person protecting the neighborhood. She told residents that conflicts only happened because certain homeowners refused to follow community expectations. She never mentioned the pressure she had created. She never mentioned the conversations behind closed doors. She never mentioned how many people had chosen silence because challenging her felt too difficult. But silence does not mean agreement. Sometimes silence means people are waiting for someone brave enough to speak first. The more evidence I gathered, the clearer the truth became. Cassandra believed my destroyed house had taken away my ability to fight. She believed losing everything would make me surrender. She did not understand that the fire had removed one thing from my life, but revealed another. It revealed the truth. And once the truth started coming together, I knew this was no longer about rebuilding a house. It was about exposing a system that allowed one person to believe she was untouchable. Cassandra still had no idea what was coming. She thought she was dealing with a homeowner trying to recover. She had no idea she was helping create the very case that would eventually bring her face to face with justice. The more I looked into the events surrounding the fire, the more I realized the flames had not erased the truth. They had exposed it. I stopped searching for one dramatic mistake from Cassandra Whitmore. Instead, I began studying the entire history behind every decision she had made. The answers were not hidden in one place. They were scattered across years of meetings, emails, complaints, and conversations that people had chosen to forget. I created a timeline. Every warning notice, every disagreement, every moment when Cassandra used her position to pressure someone who refused to follow her expectations. At first, the information looked unrelated. Different homeowners, different issues, different dates. But when everything was placed together, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Cassandra did not simply enforce HOA rules. She used them as a weapon. One of the most important discoveries came from old meeting records. Buried inside pages of routine discussions were references to my property and my refusal to accept certain demands. The language was carefully written, but the intention behind it was clear. Cassandra viewed independence as defiance. She viewed questions as challenges. She viewed cooperation as complete obedience. That was when I understood the real conflict was never about my house. My house was just the final piece of a much larger problem. I began speaking with more residents who had experienced similar situations. Many of them hesitated before sharing their stories. They looked around first, almost as if they were worried someone might hear them. That reaction told me everything. People were not silent because nothing happened. They were silent because they had learned silence felt safer. One afternoon, I met with a former HOA committee member named Gregory Parker. He brought several documents he had kept from his time working with the association. He told me he had watched Cassandra slowly gain more influence over decisions until disagreements became almost impossible. She always made it sound like she was protecting everyone, Gregory said. But somehow, the people who disagreed with her always ended up being the problem. Those words stayed with me, because that was exactly what had happened to me. Cassandra had created a version of events where she was the responsible leader and I was the difficult homeowner. But facts did not work that way. Facts did not care about popularity. Facts did not care about titles. They only showed what actually happened. I continued gathering evidence carefully. I saved copies of every communication. I organized statements from residents. I documented every connection between Cassandra's actions and the growing conflict before the fire. I knew patience was important. A rushed accusation could be dismissed. A carefully built case could not. Meanwhile, Cassandra continued appearing confident in public. She smiled during meetings. She spoke to neighbors as if the situation had already disappeared. She believed the fire had changed my life in the worst possible way. She believed I was focused only on rebuilding what I lost. She never realized that losing my home had given me something more valuable. Perspective. I could now see the system clearly. I could see how power had been used. I could see how people had been pushed into silence. And most importantly, I could see exactly where the truth would eventually lead. The courtroom. Cassandra still believed she was controlling the story. She did not understand that every document she created, every decision she made, and every person she silenced had become part of the evidence that would finally expose her. The truth was no longer buried inside private conversations. It was spreading through the community, one person at a time. For years, Cassandra Whitmore had built her reputation on being the person who always had the answers. She knew how to speak during meetings, how to present decisions as necessary, and how to make disagreement sound like a problem created by someone else. But now, people were beginning to remember things differently. The same residents who once stayed quiet started coming forward with details they had kept to themselves. They described moments when Cassandra used her position to pressure homeowners who questioned her decisions. One resident told me about a meeting where Cassandra dismissed concerns before anyone had a chance to fully explain them. Another shared how a simple disagreement over property changes turned into months of unnecessary tension. The stories were different. The pattern was the same. Cassandra did not want cooperation. She wanted compliance. I continued reviewing every piece of information carefully. I knew emotions alone would not be enough. If I wanted the truth to stand, every claim needed support. That meant patience. That meant discipline. That meant allowing the evidence to build its own story. During this process, I discovered records from previous HOA discussions that revealed how Cassandra handled conflicts behind closed doors. The documents showed a repeated habit of turning personal disagreements into official community issues. A homeowner questioned her decision. The HOA became involved. Pressure followed. The message was always clear. Accept her authority or prepare for a fight. Reading those records, I thought about the night my house burned. I remembered standing there while Cassandra spoke about community standards as if my loss was simply the result of my refusal to cooperate. But now I understood. She was not talking about rules. She was talking about control. The fire had changed my life, but it had also revealed something I might never have discovered otherwise. The person who claimed to protect the neighborhood was the same person creating fear inside it. I began preparing everything for the next stage. I organized the documents into clear categories. I separated facts from assumptions. I reviewed every timeline connection until there were no unanswered questions. The process was slow, but I knew rushing would only create weaknesses. Cassandra still believed she was safe. She continued attending HOA meetings and speaking with the same confidence she had always displayed. She acted as if the situation was already forgotten. She believed my silence meant defeat. She believed my focus on evidence meant I had no power. She was wrong. What Cassandra did not understand was that real strength does not always appear immediately. Sometimes it waits quietly. Sometimes it collects information while others celebrate too soon. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who understands exactly how the system works. I never wanted to destroy Cassandra's life. I wanted accountability. I wanted the same standards she used against others to apply to herself. Because the moment someone believes they are untouchable is usually the moment they stop protecting themselves. They stop watching their words. They stop questioning their decisions. They stop noticing the evidence they leave behind. Cassandra had spent years building a wall around herself with confidence and influence. But every wall has a weakness, and hers was the truth. Soon, she would have to face everything she thought she had hidden. Not in an HOA meeting, not in a neighborhood discussion, but in the one place where control, reputation, and confidence could no longer replace facts. A courtroom. The closer I got to the truth, the more I understood that this was never just about what happened to my house. It was about what happened when someone believed their position gave them the right to control everyone around them. By this point, Cassandra Whitmore still had no idea how much information existed. She continued moving through the neighborhood with the same confidence she had always carried. She believed the story was simple. A homeowner had lost a property. A disagreement had gone too far, and the situation would eventually disappear. But she was wrong. I was no longer trying to prove that Cassandra was difficult to deal with. That was already obvious to the people who had experienced it firsthand. I was building a case that showed a pattern of decisions, a pattern of pressure, a pattern of someone using authority without understanding responsibility. I spent days reviewing everything one final time. I checked dates, compared conversations, and organized every piece of evidence into a timeline that anyone could understand. The fire was not an isolated event. It was the result of months of escalating tension. One of the most important pieces came from an old conversation between Cassandra and other HOA members. It showed that she had discussed my property before the fire in a way that revealed her frustration with my independence. She was not concerned about protecting the community. She was concerned about controlling an outcome. That distinction changed everything. I also discovered more residents who were willing to speak. Some had stayed quiet because they did not want conflict. Others believed challenging Cassandra would only make their lives harder. But once one person stepped forward, others found the courage to do the same. Their stories showed a community where many people had noticed the problem but felt powerless to stop it. That was the part Cassandra never understood. Power only works when people believe they have no alternative. Once people find their voice, that power begins to disappear. I met with several residents and listened to their experiences. I did not interrupt. I did not push them toward a certain conclusion. I simply listened, because every story mattered. Every detail helped complete the picture. Meanwhile, Cassandra continued defending herself publicly. She spoke about rules, order, and protecting property values. She used the same words she had always used to make herself appear reasonable. But there was one thing she could not control anymore: the evidence. Evidence does not care how confident someone sounds. It does not care how respected someone appears. It only shows what happened. I knew the next step would require patience. The truth was finally clear, but the process had to be handled carefully. I could not allow frustration to replace preparation. That was never who I was. I had spent my entire life believing that facts mattered more than appearances. And that belief was the reason Cassandra had made her biggest mistake. She looked at me and saw someone who had lost everything. She saw a homeowner standing in the ashes of his own life. She never saw the person behind the silence. She never understood that I had been preparing for this moment long before she realized there was a battle. Soon, Cassandra would enter a room where her reputation would not protect her. Her confidence would not protect her. Her position would not protect her. Only the truth would matter. And the truth was something she could no longer control. The day I decided everything was ready, I did not feel excitement. I did not feel the satisfaction of finally having an advantage. I felt responsibility, because this was no longer just about me. It was about every person who had been afraid to question Cassandra Whitmore. It was about every homeowner who believed staying silent was the only way to avoid becoming her next target. I carefully reviewed the final collection of evidence one more time. The records, the statements, the timeline. Everything had to be accurate. Everything had to stand on its own. I knew Cassandra would not simply accept the truth. People who spend years controlling a story rarely give it up easily. She would defend her reputation. She would explain away every decision. She would try to make herself appear like the person being unfairly attacked. That was why I prepared for every possibility. The courtroom was not a place for emotions to decide the outcome. It was a place where facts had to survive questions. Before the hearing, Cassandra continued behaving as if nothing could threaten her position. She attended HOA meetings, spoke with residents, and maintained the same confident expression she had shown since the beginning. To anyone watching from a distance, she looked untouchable. But I knew something she did not. Confidence disappears quickly when the evidence starts speaking. The morning of the hearing arrived quietly. I remember walking toward the courthouse and thinking about the night my house burned. The smoke, the flames, the feeling of standing there while everything familiar disappeared. That moment changed my life, but it also gave me a clearer understanding of what mattered. A house could be rebuilt, trust could be repaired, but accountability could never be ignored. Inside the courthouse, Cassandra walked in with the same certainty she had carried for months. She looked around the room, greeted people she recognized, and acted as though she still controlled the situation. Then she saw me. For a brief moment, her expression changed. It was not fear. It was confusion. She had expected to face the homeowner whose property was destroyed. She had not expected the person standing there to understand the law, the process, and the responsibility behind every decision. I watched her carefully, not because I wanted to see her uncomfortable, because I wanted to understand something. How could someone become so convinced that power belonged only to them? The hearing began. Documents were presented. Records were examined. Statements were reviewed. Every piece of information that had once seemed disconnected started forming a complete picture. The warnings, the pressure, the conversations, the decisions, the pattern. Cassandra had spent months believing she could control how people viewed the situation. But the courtroom was different. Here, appearances could not replace evidence. A title could not replace accountability. And confidence could not replace the truth. As the process continued, I realized something important. The goal was never to embarrass Cassandra. The goal was never to make her feel powerless. The goal was to show that everyone, regardless of position, had limits. Because when someone believes they are above the rules become the very thing that brings their actions into the light. And sitting there in that courtroom, I knew the truth was finally where it belonged. Not hidden, not ignored, not controlled. It was being heard. The room became completely silent when the evidence started connecting every piece of the story Cassandra Whitmore had tried to control. For months, she had relied on confidence. She believed the way she presented herself was enough to make people trust her. She believed her position as HOA president gave her authority over every conversation, every decision, and every person who questioned her. But inside the courtroom, confidence was not enough. The documents spoke first. The timeline showed the pressure placed on me before the fire. The records showed the repeated conflicts between Cassandra and homeowners who refused to simply accept her decisions. The statements from residents revealed a pattern that had existed long before my house became ashes. One piece of evidence after another removed the image Cassandra had carefully built. She was no longer just the HOA president who claimed to protect the neighborhood. She was someone who had used that position to silence disagreement. I watched her expression change as the information was reviewed. At the beginning of the hearing, she appeared completely certain. She sat confidently, as if she expected the same outcome she had always received. People usually listened to her. People usually stepped back. People usually decided that challenging her was not worth the effort. But this was different. The courtroom did not respond to confidence. It responded to facts. A statement from a former HOA member showed how Cassandra handled disagreements privately. A resident explained how simple questions often became unnecessary conflicts. Another homeowner described how they stopped participating in meetings because they believed their opinions would never matter. The stories were different, but they all carried the same message. Cassandra had created a community where people were afraid to challenge her. And that was the moment everyone understood the real problem. The issue was never a single disagreement. The issue was a pattern of behavior. I remembered standing outside my burning home months earlier. I remembered hearing Cassandra talk about responsibility and community standards while my entire life was disappearing behind flames. At the time, I wondered how someone could be so calm during another person's loss. Now I understood. She was never looking at the damage. She was looking at control. But control only works when people accept it. Once the truth entered the room, Cassandra's influence started disappearing. The same residents who once avoided conflict were now watching the evidence unfold. The same people who once believed Cassandra had all the answers were finally seeing the questions she could not answer. That was the part she never expected. She thought silence meant agreement. She thought hesitation meant weakness. She thought a homeowner who stayed calm was someone she could ignore. She was wrong. My goal was never to humiliate Cassandra. It was never about proving that I had more power than she did. It was about proving that power without responsibility eventually creates consequences. A position does not make someone untouchable. A title does not erase accountability. An influence does not change the truth. As the hearing continued, I saw the person who once controlled every conversation finally facing the one thing she could not manage. Reality. The evidence was no longer hidden in files. It was no longer sitting quietly in private conversations. It was now visible to everyone. And Cassandra Whitmore finally understood the mistake she had made. She thought she had destroyed my home. She never realized she had built the case that would expose everything she had spent years trying to hide. The aftermath of the hearing was not the dramatic moment everyone expected. There were no loud celebrations. No one stood up and cheered. Instead, there was something more powerful. Silence. The kind of silence that comes when people finally understand the truth they had been too afraid to face. For years, Cassandra Whitmore had built her influence by making people believe she was the only person capable of protecting the neighborhood. She created the impression that challenging her decisions meant challenging the entire community. But after the evidence was revealed, that illusion began to disappear. Residents who once avoided speaking during HOA meetings started sharing their experiences openly. People who had quietly accepted decisions they disagreed with began asking questions. Not because they wanted revenge, because they finally realized they had a voice. That was the change Cassandra never expected. She thought her authority came from her title. She thought being HOA president meant people had to listen. But true leadership is not created by making people afraid to disagree. It is created by earning their trust. The community began reviewing how the HOA operated. Meetings became more transparent. Discussions that were once controlled by one person became conversations where everyone could participate. For me, watching that happen meant more than any personal victory. Because the reason I continued fighting was never just about my house. The fire had taken away a place filled with memories, but it had also revealed a problem that affected many others. My home was destroyed, but the truth had survived. I eventually returned to the property where everything began. Standing there again, I looked at the empty space where my house once stood. Months earlier, that same ground had been covered with ash, broken pieces, and the remains of everything I had built. But this time, it felt different. I did not see only what was lost. I saw what had been recovered. My ability to speak. My ability to defend myself. My belief that doing the right thing still mattered. Cassandra had believed the fire would end my fight. She believed losing my home meant losing my strength. She never understood that strength was never about what I owned. It was about what I was willing to stand for. Looking back, I realized the biggest lesson was not about Cassandra. It was about the danger of unchecked authority. Any position can become dangerous when someone believes the rules apply to everyone except themselves. A title can create influence, but only integrity creates respect. Cassandra wanted control. I wanted accountability. Those two things were never going to lead to the same outcome. The person who once believed she could silence an entire community eventually became the reason that community found its voice. And that was the final truth she could not escape. She did not lose because someone was more powerful than her. She lost because facts were stronger than her story. Because evidence lasted longer than reputation. Because justice did not need to shout. It only needed time. As I prepared to rebuild my home, I carried one final thought with me. The fire destroyed my house, but it also exposed everything hidden behind the walls of that neighborhood. And sometimes, the thing that reveals the truth is the very thing someone tried to use to destroy you. Years later, when I looked back at everything that happened, I realized the fire was never the end of my story. It was the moment my story changed direction. The house I lost was rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. The walls were new. The rooms were different. The memories inside would come from a new chapter of my life. But the lesson I carried from that night remained the same. A person's true character is not revealed when everything is easy. It is revealed when they believe they have the power to take something away from someone else. Cassandra Whitmore believed she had that power. She believed her position as HOA president gave her control over the people around her. She believed confidence could replace accountability. She believed that if she spoke strongly enough, people would accept her version of reality. For a long time, many people did. But eventually, reality catches up. The truth does not need permission to exist. It does not need popularity. It does not need someone powerful to approve it. It only needs the opportunity to be seen. After everything became public, I watched the community change. Residents who once avoided HOA discussions became more involved. People started asking questions instead of simply accepting answers. They learned something important. A healthy community is not built by everyone agreeing with one person. It is built by people having the courage to speak when something feels wrong. That was the biggest difference between Cassandra and me. She wanted control. I wanted fairness. She believed strength came from making others follow her decisions. I believed strength came from standing by the truth, even when it was difficult. Looking back at the courtroom, I still remember the moment when her confidence disappeared. It was not because she suddenly understood everything she had done. It was because she finally understood something she had ignored from the beginning. The person she underestimated was never powerless. I had simply chosen patience over reaction. I had chosen evidence over anger. I had chosen justice over revenge. And that choice made all the difference. The experience changed the way I looked at authority. A title can give someone responsibility, but it does not make them better than the people they serve. A position can create influence, but it cannot erase consequences. Eventually, every person has to answer for the decisions they make. Cassandra thought the fire would leave me with nothing. She thought the ashes of my home represented the end of my ability to fight. She never understood that some things cannot be destroyed. Integrity, patience, the commitment to do what is right. Those were the things that carried me forward. Today, when I walk through my rebuilt home, I do not think only about what was taken from me. I think about what was revealed. I think about the neighbors who found their voices. I think about the importance of questioning power. I think about how the truth survived even when someone tried to bury it. Because in the end, Cassandra did not lose because I defeated her. She lost because her own choices created the consequences she tried to avoid. The fire destroyed my house, but it also exposed the truth hidden behind the walls of our community. And that is something no one could ever take away. Justice did not arrive with anger. It arrived with patience. It arrived with evidence. It arrived when the truth finally had a place to be heard.